The night slowly melted into the early hours of the morning. The world around them grew still, the air calm and cool. The stars above faded into a pale gray sky, hinting that a new day was beginning. Maya and Noah remained on that park bench for a long time, their hands still gently linked. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It wasn't filled with things left unsaid. It felt safe, warm, and full of meaning. When Maya finally stood up, she wasn't the same woman who had walked into the cafe earlier that day. Something inside her had shifted. It wasn't a dramatic change. It was soft and quiet, like the way dawn slowly replaces darkness. She still carried her past with her, the pain, the silence, the fear. But it didn't feel as heavy anymore, because now, she knew she wasn't carrying it alone. Noah walked her back toward the main street. The city was slowly waking up. Lights flickered on in apartment windows, birds began to sing softly, and a few people walked to early morning buses. Everything looked ordinary, but to Maya, the world looked different. Brighter somehow. They didn't talk much as they walked, they didn't need to. The silence between them had changed. It was no longer made of walls, it was made of trust. As they reached the corner where their paths would split, Maya stopped. She looked down at the damp pavement, then slowly up at him. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, unsure how to put everything she felt into words. Noah waited patiently, just like he always had. "I don't know what comes next," she finally said softly. He nodded. "You don't have to know right now." Her lips curved into a tiny smile. "I'm not used to having someone wait for me." He returned the smile. Gentle, warm, the kind of smile that had once made her heart feel safe. "I'm not going anywhere." She breathed out slowly, letting those words settle inside her. Then she whispered, "Thank you." They stood there for a few quiet moments before parting ways. As she walked down the street, the morning light brushed across her face and, for the first time in a very long time, she didn't feel invisible. She didn't feel like someone the world had forgotten. She felt like someone who could still write the rest of her story. The days that followed were slow, careful, and real. Maya didn't wake up the next morning magically healed. Her life didn't turn perfect overnight. But it began to shift in small, quiet ways. The first change was inside her. She started allowing herself to feel things again. She no longer avoided her reflection in windows. She stopped walking with her head always down. When the wind touched her face, she actually felt it. When the sun shone through her window, she noticed the way it painted light on the floor. Little things that used to pass by unnoticed now began to matter again. She and Noah started meeting more often, sometimes at the same cafe, sometimes by the river, sometimes at the park bench where everything had changed. They didn't plan every meeting. Sometimes it was just a message, a short walk, or sitting quietly beside each other. There was no pressure between them. There was no pretending. There was only truth. Maya talked more. Not everything at once. She wasn't ready to open every door in her heart right away. But little by little, she shared pieces of her story. And Noah listened. Always listened. He never tried to erase her past. He never told her to forget. He just stood beside her while she spoke, steady and kind. One afternoon, as they walked by the river, she told him about the first night she had slept outside, how scared she had been and how the sound of the water had been the only thing that calmed her. He didn't interrupt. He just reached for her hand and held it. Another evening, they sat on the bench where they had shared that quiet, gentle moment under the stars. She told him how she had stopped believing in people, how trust had felt like a door she would never open again. He didn't tell her she was wrong. He just said softly, "You opened it now." And she smiled. A real smile. The kind she thought she'd forgotten how to make. Slowly, Maya started to rebuild her life. She found a small room to rent. Nothing fancy, but it was warm and safe. The first night she slept there, she lay on the bed staring at the ceiling, feeling strange and grateful at the same time. It wasn't about the place itself. It was about having a door she could close behind her and know she was safe. She also began looking for work. At first, she doubted herself every single day. She thought no one would ever give her a chance again. But Noah reminded her gently, "You're more than what happened to you." Those words stayed with her. They became a small fire inside her, a quiet strength. The first job she got wasn't a big one. It was at a small bakery near the park. She spent her mornings arranging bread, pouring coffee, and greeting customers. She wasn't used to being around so many people at first, but slowly she learned to smile at strangers again. She learned to laugh when someone told her a silly joke. She learned to look people in the eye and not feel like she was disappearing. Some days were hard. There were mornings when the weight of her past tried to pull her back. There were moments when old fears whispered to her. But this time, she wasn't alone with those whispers. She had someone who saw her, really saw her, and reminded her that she mattered. One evening, months after that first night, Maya and Noah sat together on the bridge overlooking the water. The sun was setting, painting the sky with orange and gold. She leaned against the railing, feeling the breeze on her face. Noah stood beside her, quiet and steady, just as he always had been. She looked at the water and whispered, "I never thought I'd get here." Noah glanced at her. "Where's here?" "Here," she said, waving a hand toward the soft light, the gentle flow of the river, the people walking by with smiles on their faces. "A place where I can breathe again." He smiled at her, and it wasn't a smile of surprise. It was a smile of someone who had believed in this moment long before she had. "You did this," he said softly. She shook her head. "No, we did this." For a moment, the world around them faded, leaving only the sound of water, the warm air, and the quiet between them. She had once thought she would never feel light again. But here she was, standing in the golden glow of evening, feeling more alive than she ever thought possible. Maya looked at him and saw more than just the boy she had once loved. She saw the man who had waited for her, who had seen her through the silence, who had stood beside her without asking for anything in return. And she knew something very simple and very true. Kindness had brought her back to herself. Noah reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, just like he used to years ago. His touch was gentle, unhurried. Maya didn't look away. She didn't shrink back. She met his gaze fully, without fear. "Do you remember what you said that night?" she asked softly. He raised a brow, curious. "Which part?" "When I told you the truth." "And you laughed," she said with a small smile. He laughed softly again, the same warm laugh. "Yeah, I remember. I thought you'd walk away," she admitted. He shook his head slowly. "I never even thought about it." Her smile grew. That night changed everything. He looked at her with steady eyes. "It wasn't just one night, Maya. It was you choosing to come back. It was you choosing to be seen." Her eyes softened. "I was so scared. But you still came," he said simply. "That's what matters." They leaned against the railing, side by side, watching the last bit of sunlight disappear behind the buildings. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still things Maya had to face, steps she had to take. But now she faced them not as a shadow hiding from the world, but as a woman who had survived, who had rebuilt herself piece by piece. Weeks turned into months, and life continued, and quietly, beautifully in its own way. Maya began to trust herself again. She made new friends at the bakery, learned to laugh at ordinary things, and even found joy in small routines. She didn't need everything to be perfect anymore. She just needed it to be real. And Noah stayed by her side, not to fix her, not to carry her, but to walk with her. Together they built something soft and steady, something that didn't need grand words or promises, something made of shared walks, late-night talks, quiet laughter, and gentle care. One evening, as they walked by the river again, Maya stopped and looked up at the night sky. The stars were shining bright just like that first night, but this time she didn't whisper her fears into the darkness. She whispered something else. "I'm glad I came back." Noah squeezed her hand gently. I'm glad you did too. And in that simple moment, with the stars above, the water below, and the world around them, Maya realized something she hadn't understood before. The story she had once thought was over wasn't over at all. It had only just begun. She had found her way back, not just to a person, but to herself. The rain had finally stopped. The air was cool, soft, and smelled fresh, the way the world smells after it has washed away all the dust. The park was quiet now, with only a few late walkers passing by, their shoes tapping softly against the wet path. The wind moved gently through the leaves, carrying a calm that felt almost magical. Maya sat there on the bench, feeling different from the woman who had walked into the cafe hours ago. Her heart was still heavy, yes, but it was no longer locked up. It was breathing, and for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to hide every part of herself. Noah stretched his arms a little, letting out a soft breath. He had spent hours beside her, listening without rushing her, and that quiet patience had done something no loud words could have done. It had reached a place inside her that had been silent for too long. Maya turned her face toward the night sky. The clouds had started to move apart, revealing faint stars scattered above. She stared at them as if they were old friends she'd forgotten how to talk to. Noah followed her gaze, and for a while they both sat in silence, looking up at the same sky. Two people who had been separated by time but brought back together by something quiet and unspoken. I almost forgot what the stars looked like, she whispered. They never really go away, Noah said softly. Sometimes the clouds just stay a little longer than we expect. She smiled faintly at that. His words weren't poetic on purpose, and they were natural, easy, warm. He had always had a way of saying simple things that carried more meaning than long speeches. Maya shifted slightly on the bench and wrapped her arms around herself. You know, she said after a pause, I used to love nights like this. I used to think they were a kind of promise. A promise of what? He asked gently. That things wouldn't stay dark forever, she whispered. That even when everything felt too heavy, the sky would remind me that there's still light somewhere. Noah nodded, his voice low. You still have that light, Maya. You might not see it all the time, but it's still there. Her chest tightened at those words. She wasn't used to being spoken to like that anymore. It was as if his voice reached places inside her that she had stopped listening to. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the night air touch her face. Noah, she said quietly, I'm scared. He didn't move closer or try to fix it. He simply asked, of what? Of letting someone see me like this, she admitted. Of being real again. Of not being able to live up to what I used to be. Noah took a slow breath before answering. You don't have to be who you used to be, he said. You just have to be you. Her throat tightened. She had spent so long pretending she didn't care how people saw her. But the truth was she cared deeply. She had been terrified that if anyone saw her now, after everything, they wouldn't see the girl they once loved. They would only see the broken pieces. But Noah didn't seem to see broken pieces. He seemed to see her. Why are you so kind to me? She asked softly. His answer came without hesitation. Because I know who you are, Maya. I've always known. The wind moved between them, light and quiet, brushing their faces like a gentle hand. She turned her head slowly to look at him. His eyes were steady, not intense, not overwhelming, just steady, the way someone looks at something familiar and real. She hesitated, then whispered, I didn't bathe for months. Noah. The words came out shaky, but there was a strange strength in them. She had carried shame like a heavy coat, and now she was slowly beginning to take it off. He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. Instead, he let out a soft laugh, not a laugh that mocked or dismissed, but the kind of laugh that said, that doesn't change anything. The sound of it wrapped around her like warmth. Maya blinked, almost surprised. Why are you laughing? Because, he said gently, you're here. You're talking to me, and none of that matters to me, not then. Not now. Her heart skipped a beat. She had expected disgust. She had expected the look people gave her when they passed her on the street, the quick turn of their eyes, the judgment, the distance. But Noah's eyes didn't carry any of that. His smile was soft, real, and full of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Acceptance. Maya lowered her gaze, biting her lip to keep her emotions steady. Her cheeks grew warm, not from embarrassment, but from the way his kindness broke through her walls so easily. She whispered almost too softly, "You make it sound like it's nothing." "Because it is nothing," he said softly. "What matters is that you're still here. You're still you." Her eyes filled slowly, but she didn't look away. She let herself feel the weight of his words. Words that didn't try to fix her, didn't demand anything from her, just saw her. Then something inside her did what it hadn't done in a long time. It let go. Not completely, just enough. She reached out slowly, her hand trembling just a little, and touched his hand resting on the bench between them. He didn't pull away. His fingers turned slightly so their hands could meet properly. Their palms pressed together, warm against the cool air. It was such a simple touch, yet it felt like something huge. Noah looked at her, and in that quiet gaze, there were no promises of a perfect future, no demands for answers. There was only one message: "I see you." Maya's heart ached in the best way. She leaned forward just a little, drawn not by impulse but by something gentle, real. He didn't move toward her, he waited. And when she finally met him halfway, their foreheads touched softly like two puzzle pieces that had once fit perfectly, and somehow still did. Neither of them said a word. The world around them fell away, leaving only the sound of their breathing and the soft rustle of the night air. The closeness didn't come with pressure. It came with quiet, unshakable understanding. Noah whispered, almost against her skin, "You're safe." Maya closed her eyes, and for a moment, everything she'd been carrying, and the shame, the fear, the endless days of feeling invisible, felt lighter. His words weren't magic. They didn't erase everything, but they reminded her she wasn't standing alone anymore. When he kissed her, it wasn't hurried or loud. It wasn't about fixing her or claiming anything. It was soft, a kind of kiss that carried no conditions. It said, "I accept you exactly as you are." It was a kiss that didn't ask her to be perfect. It asked her to just be. The world tilted in the gentlest way. The stars above blurred a little. The sound of the night grew quieter, and the air seemed to hold its breath around them. It wasn't a storybook moment with bright fireworks. It was smaller, realer, and because of that, it meant more. When they pulled back, she kept her forehead against his, breathing slowly. She didn't know what to say. She didn't know if there even were words big enough for what she was feeling. Noah broke the silence with a whisper. "You don't have to hide from me, Maya, not ever." Her eyes fluttered open, meeting his. She didn't feel like the girl she used to be. She felt like someone new, someone allowed to be both fragile and strong at the same time. "I don't know how to be myself anymore," she admitted softly. "Then we'll figure it out." "Together," he replied. She felt tears rising. But they weren't the heavy, painful kind she was used to. These were warm, quiet, the kind that come when a wall inside you finally cracks, letting light in. She let out a soft laugh, a real one this time. "You make everything sound simple." "It doesn't have to be complicated," he said, brushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "It just has to be honest." They sat there under the soft glow of the streetlight, their hands still linked. The stars above were faint but steady, like small lights promising that night wouldn't last forever. Maya felt the warmth of his hand, the steadiness of his breathing, and the quiet promise in his eyes. For months she had walked through life feeling like a shadow, unseen and unheard. But right now she didn't feel like a shadow. She felt real. She felt seen. "I used to think I'd never feel this again," she whispered. "What?" "Like I belonged somewhere." He smiled gently. "You do." She rested her head lightly against his shoulder, letting the stillness of the night wrap around them. Her heart was still learning how to trust again, how to breathe again, but for the first time in a very long time it felt possible. They stayed like that for a long time. No rush, no big declarations. Just warmth, closeness, and quiet understanding. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about building a small piece of safety in the present. And in that soft, silent moment, something bloomed quietly inside Maya. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was small, fragile, and beautiful. Hope. The night grew quieter as they continued walking side by side. The rain had softened into a gentle mist, hanging in the air like a fine veil. Streetlights glowed softly, their light reflecting on the wet pavement. The river moved slowly, as if it too was listening to the world around it. Maya's footsteps felt heavier, not because she was tired, but because something inside her was stirring. She had carried her story inside for so long that it felt like part of her. It had been easier to stay silent than to let anyone in. But tonight, with Noah walking beside her, she felt a strange, unfamiliar pull. The feeling that maybe she didn't have to hold it all alone anymore. Noah didn't push her.
He never did.
He just walked at her pace. Umbrella tilted slightly over her side, letting his shoulder get wet. Every once in a while he would glance at her, not with curiosity but with quiet patience. It was the kind of look that said, "I'll wait as long as it takes." They turned off the main street and entered a small park. The benches were damp, the grass was glistening, and the air carried the earthy smell of rain. They found a wooden bench under a tree that offered some extra shelter. Maya sat down slowly, pulling her knees a little closer as if protecting herself from memories that still lingered. Noah sat beside her, not too close, but close enough to remind her she wasn't alone. For a long time she stared at the ground. Her fingers traced circles on the wet wood of the bench. The city around them was alive but far away. It felt like they were in their own small world, where time had slowed down just for them. "Noah," she said finally, her voice quiet. "There's so much you don't know." He nodded gently. "I know," she took a shaky breath. "I disappeared because I didn't know how to let anyone see the mess I'd become. I was afraid that if people saw me like that, they'd turn away." His voice was calm, steady. "I wouldn't have." She almost laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "That's the thing. I didn't believe that anyone would stay." Rainwater slid down the umbrella, creating a soft rhythm that matched her heartbeat. She had kept this inside for so long that saying even a few words felt like tearing open an old door that had been locked for years. But Noah's quiet presence made the door just a little easier to open. "I lost everything," she continued slowly. "The place I stayed in. The people I thought were my friends. My job, even myself. One by one, everything slipped away. And when I tried to ask for help, I couldn't find the right words. So I stopped trying." Noah's hands were folded in his lap, but his eyes never left her. She could feel his attention like a soft blanket around her. Not heavy, not pressing, just there. "I started living in corners of the city no one noticed," she whispered. "Parks, empty buildings. I would wake up and no one would even know I existed. Some days I didn't speak to a single person. I forgot what it felt like to be seen." Her words came out soft but steady now. Each sentence carried a weight she had carried for months. There was no dramatic tone, no loud emotion, just the quiet truth of someone who had survived silence. "I used to pass this park at night," she said, looking around slowly. "People would walk their dogs or jog, and I'd sit here pretending I was one of them. I would imagine someone sitting next to me, talking to me like I still belonged. But every night I just sat alone." Noah's throat tightened, but he didn't interrupt. He knew she wasn't looking for pity. She was giving him a piece of her truth, and the least he could do was hold it carefully. Maya looked down at her hands again. "I stopped looking at mirrors. I stopped caring what I looked like. I thought if I became invisible enough, I wouldn't feel the pain anymore." For a long time after that, the only sound was the soft dripping of rain from the leaves above them. Maya had never said these words aloud before. It felt strange to hear her own voice telling the story she had hidden away. It felt raw. It felt real. Then Noah spoke, his voice low. "Maya, you didn't deserve to go through all of that alone." She shook her head slowly. "Maybe I did. I made mistakes. I trusted the wrong people. I didn't fight hard enough to keep my life together." He turned slightly toward her. "That doesn't make it your fault," she didn't answer. She wasn't ready to believe that yet. But his words didn't sound like empty comfort. They sounded like someone who truly meant them. The sky above the park had turned darker, the rain barely a whisper now. The world seemed to be holding its breath with them. Noah leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "Do you know why I came to the river every year?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "I came because I believed you'd find your way back one day. I didn't know how or when, but something in me just knew." He paused for a moment. "And now you're here, and that's enough." Her eyes filled slowly, but she didn't look away. She didn't try to hide. She had spent too long hiding. "Why would you wait for someone like me?" "Because," he said softly, "you're not just someone. You're you, and you matter to me." Her breath caught in her chest. She wasn't used to hearing words like that anymore. For months, the only words she'd heard were the echoes of her own silence. She had almost forgotten what kindness sounded like. Maya leaned back against the bench, staring up at the branches above them. Raindrops slid down slowly, catching the light from the street lamp nearby. I used to believe no one would ever look at me the same way again, she whispered. But you're sitting here like I never disappeared. Noah smiled gently. Because to me, you never did. The world blurred around her for a moment. She blinked quickly, swallowing the lump rising in her throat. It wasn't about falling apart in front of him. It was about being able to breathe again, something she hadn't truly done in a long time. They sat like that for a long time. No need for big words, just the sound of rain, the quiet hum of the city, and two people sharing a silence that didn't hurt anymore. Eventually, Maya spoke again, her voice softer now. You know, when I was out there alone, I used to talk to myself. I'd imagine conversations, laughter, even arguments. I guess it was my way of remembering what it felt like to be human. Noah turned his head slightly toward her. You are human, Maya, you never stopped being. She smiled faintly. I almost forgot how it felt. He reached out slowly, not to grab or pull, but just to place his hand over hers gently on the bench. It was a small gesture, warm and steady. She didn't move away. Instead, she let his hand rest on hers, and for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she needed to run. The night breeze brushed against them, cool and soft. Maya's heart felt different now. Not light, not healed, but awake. She had spent so long convincing herself that she didn't deserve to be seen, but Noah's presence was slowly proving otherwise. Noah, she said softly. Yeah? Thank you. He looked at her, his eyes kind. You don't have to thank me. Yes, I do, she insisted gently. You're the first person in a long time who didn't look away. He squeezed her hand lightly. And I'm not going to. She let out a shaky breath and leaned her head against the back of the bench. Above them, the clouds were slowly breaking apart, revealing a few faint stars. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind her that light was still out there, even after the longest storms. Maya closed her eyes for a moment. For the first time in months, the silence inside her didn't feel like a cage. It felt like space. Space to breathe. Space to exist. Space to be her again. She turned to look at Noah, really look at him. He wasn't a memory anymore. He was here. Real. Solid. Patient. And something inside her whispered that maybe, just maybe, she could find her way back to herself. The rain stopped completely then, leaving behind a calm stillness. People passed by in the distance, but it felt like the world had narrowed down to this park, this bench, and the two of them. She whispered quietly, almost to herself, maybe I don't have to be invisible anymore. Noah's voice was warm. No, Maya, you never were. And with that simple sentence, something deep inside her shifted. It wasn't a sudden burst of happiness or a perfect ending. It was quieter than that, a slow, steady spark of hope. A feeling she thought she had lost forever. They stayed there until the mist lifted from the trees, until the streetlights dimmed a little, and the world felt softer. And though the night held no promises, Maya knew something had changed. She wasn't alone anymore. The rain outside had turned from a soft drizzle to a steady rhythm, tapping gently against the cafe windows. It was the kind of sound that made people lean a little closer, speak a little softer. Inside, everything felt warm, almost safe, like the world outside didn't matter for a little while. Noah and Maya had been talking for nearly an hour, but the air between them still felt like a fragile thread. Words were coming slowly, carefully. Maya hadn't shared everything yet, but she had shared enough for him to sense the depth of the pain she carried. There was a quiet strength in her voice, the kind that only comes after surviving something no one else can fully understand. When the clock above the counter struck 5, the cafe lights grew softer. People started to leave, putting on coats and scarves, holding umbrellas. Maya glanced at the window, watching raindrops race each other down the glass. Her face reflected in the window pane looked tired, older, and yet somehow more alive than before. Noah followed her gaze. Do you want to walk a bit? He asked gently. She hesitated for a second. The idea of stepping outside, being under the open sky, made her heart beat faster. But something about Noah's calm presence made it feel less frightening. She nodded slowly. Yeah, I'd like that. They put on their coats and stepped outside. The cold air wrapped around them, and for a moment she closed her eyes, letting the rain kiss her cheeks. It was a feeling she had missed without even realizing it. being outside and not feeling invisible. Noah opened his umbrella and held it over both of them. The world around them was washed in silver light from the street lamps, the pavement shining wet beneath their feet. They walked along the narrow street that led to the river. It was quiet there. The sound of the rain mixed with the soft rush of water moving under the bridge. Their steps matched without either of them trying. It felt natural, like a rhythm they had once known by heart. Maya pulled her scarf tighter around her neck. She wasn't used to walking beside someone anymore. She wasn't used to being seen. For so long she had walked alone, blending into crowds, trying to disappear. But tonight was different. Tonight Noah was beside her. He glanced at her out of the corner of his eye. "I used to walk here almost every weekend," he said softly. "It reminded me of you." She looked up at him in surprise. "Me?" He smiled faintly. "Yeah, you always loved the river at night. You said it sounded like it was talking." "I used to think about that." Her lips curved into a soft smile. She remembered that. Years ago, she used to bring him here and make him listen to the water. She had always believed that silence had its own language. Back then, they would sit by the edge, share hot drinks, and make quiet promises about the future. Promises they thought nothing could break. The rain grew heavier for a moment, and she shifted a little closer to him under the umbrella. She didn't mean to, it just happened. But he didn't move away. He tilted the umbrella so that it covered her completely, getting his shoulder wet without even thinking twice. "You always do that," she murmured. "Do what?" "Put other people first." He chuckled softly. "Maybe I just know who's worth standing in the rain for." She didn't reply to that. Her chest felt tight, not in a bad way, but in a way that made it hard to breathe for a second. She had spent so many nights wishing for someone to look at her the way he was looking at her now, someone who didn't see her as a mistake or a burden, someone who saw her. They reached the small bridge that crossed over the river. The water below moved slowly, reflecting the glow of the street lamps like silver ribbons. They stopped at the middle of the bridge, the umbrella still shielding them from the rain. She rested her hands on the cold metal railing and stared down at the water. For a while, neither of them spoke, and strangely, it didn't feel awkward. The quiet felt full, not empty. Noah finally broke the silence. "Maya, why did you send me that message? After all this time?" Her fingers brushed against the wet railing. She took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs. "Because I was tired of hiding," she whispered. "I spent so many days walking through this city like a shadow. I stopped believing anyone would ever remember me. But when I thought about the one person who might still care, it was you." Noah didn't interrupt her. He just listened. "I didn't know how you'd react," she continued softly. "I was scared you'd hate me. Or worse, pretend like I never existed. But I needed to know if I still had a place in this world." He turned slightly so he could see her face. Rain clung to her lashes like tiny diamonds. Her voice wasn't loud, but every word felt heavy, real, and alive. It wasn't just a confession. It was a piece of her heart she was slowly uncovering. "You'll always have a place," he said quietly. Maya blinked, not expecting those words. She turned to face him fully now, standing close beneath the umbrella. She could see his face clearly. The same warm eyes, the same quiet strength. Nothing in him looked forced. His words were steady, like they had always been waiting for this moment. "You don't even know everything," she whispered. "I don't have to." He replied gently. "You're here now. That matters." She lowered her gaze to the ground. She had spent months telling herself no one cared, that the world had moved on without her. Hearing someone say she still mattered was almost too much to take in. She bit the inside of her cheek, trying to keep her emotions steady. The sound of the river filled the silence again. It was calm, like a soft voice humming an old song. She leaned slightly against the railing, her hands gripping the cold metal. The umbrella tilted over them, catching the rain, holding them in their own small world. Noah spoke again, his voice soft but sure. "Maya, whatever happened, whatever you've been through, you don't have to carry it alone anymore." She lifted her head slowly. "I don't know how to let anyone in anymore." "Then don't force it," he said simply. "We can start with walking, talking, just being here. That's enough." Something inside her shifted quietly. It wasn't a loud or sudden change, it was gentle, like the first bit of sunlight after a long night. She wasn't used to kindness anymore. But here it was, standing next to her in the rain. She exhaled slowly. "I thought about this moment so many times," she admitted. "But in my head I was always too broken to show up. Noah shook his head lightly. You're not broken, Maya, you're just tired. There's a difference. Those words landed deep inside her chest. No one had said something like that to her before. People either looked at her with pity or avoided her altogether. But Noah didn't look at her like she was fragile. He looked at her like she was still whole. The rain softened again, almost as if the sky itself was giving them a quiet moment. Maya felt warmth spread through her even though the air was cold. She wasn't sure if it was because of his words or simply because, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't alone. I used to love this bridge, she said quietly. You still can? He answered. She looked out at the water again. Do you remember the night we promised to meet here every year, no matter what? He laughed softly. Yeah, I came here the first year. You didn't. She winced a little. I know. I came the second year too, he added with a small smile. And the third. After that, I stopped expecting. But I never stopped hoping. Her heart tightened again. She hadn't known that. She had spent those years feeling invisible, believing no one would ever look for her. But here he was, someone who had quietly waited even when he didn't have a reason to. Noah, she whispered. I don't deserve that. He shook his head. It's not about deserving. It's about what's real. She felt something warm rise in her throat, a mix of guilt, gratitude, and a small spark of hope she thought she had lost forever. The rain slid off the umbrella in soft sheets, the sound wrapping around them like a quiet blanket. A soft breeze made her shiver slightly. Noah noticed without her saying a word. He stepped a little closer, not touching her, but just enough so the umbrella covered her completely again. His small, wordless gestures had always been his way of showing care. She remembered that about him, the way he never needed grand speeches to make someone feel safe. Maya let out a shaky breath. You make it sound so simple. It doesn't have to be complicated, he replied. Sometimes just showing up is enough. She thought about that. For years she had carried the belief that she had to be perfect to be loved again, that she had to fix every broken part of her before anyone could accept her. But Noah's words told her a different story. A story where showing up just as she was enough. They stayed on the bridge for a long time, listening to the rain and the water. Words weren't always needed. Sometimes silence said everything. When they finally started walking again, the world didn't feel as heavy as before. The city lights blurred through the soft curtain of rain, and the quiet rhythm of their footsteps echoed against the wet pavement. It wasn't a big moment. It wasn't loud. But for Maya, it was everything. For the first time in a very long time, she felt like she belonged somewhere. And that feeling wasn't built on a promise or a plan. It was built on a moment, a quiet night, a shared umbrella, and the gentle certainty in Noah's voice that she mattered. The air outside the cafe was crisp that afternoon, the kind of chill that made people wrap their scarves a little tighter and walk a little faster. But inside the little coffee shop, it was warm and soft, filled with the smell of cinnamon, roasted beans, and quiet chatter. Noah sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around a steaming cup. He wasn't in a rush. He never really was. But today, something was different. His heart was beating a little louder than usual, and his mind couldn't stop wandering back to the message he'd received the night before. It had been years, almost 5, since he'd last seen Maya. Once she had been the center of his world. She had a laugh that could turn silence into sunlight, and eyes that held a kind of fire he'd never seen again. Then one day she was simply gone. No explanation. No goodbye. Just empty spaces where memories used to live. For a long time he had tried to move on, convincing himself that people change, that maybe she was never meant to stay. But he never really forgot her. Some people you just don't forget. The message came unexpectedly. A short line. Noah, can we meet tomorrow? I need to see you. His heart had stopped for a second when he saw it. She was back. Or at least she wanted to be. And now, as he sat in the cafe waiting, he wondered what she would look like, what she would say, and why she had disappeared in the first place. He also wondered if he was ready to face her again. The door opened and the bell above it rang gently. A gust of cold wind followed the sound and a woman stepped inside. She had a long coat, a dark scarf, and a woolen hat pulled down low. At first, Noah didn't recognize her. She looked thinner than he remembered, her cheeks a little hollow, her eyes a little tired. But when she lifted her head and smiled softly, his breath caught in his throat. Maya. Even after all these years, he could see her in the curve of that smile. She scanned the room and saw him. For a second, she hesitated, as if unsure whether to come closer. But then she took a deep breath, walked across the room, and stopped in front of him. Her hands were tucked into her coat pockets like she was trying to keep them from shaking. "Hi," she said softly. Noah stood up, unsure of whether to hug her or just smile. It had been too long and too much had been left unsaid, but her voice still had that same warmth, the same gentle rhythm. He smiled back. "Hi." They sat down across from each other, and for a moment neither of them said anything. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was a heavy silence, like the kind that holds too many memories inside it. She reached for the menu, not really reading it, just holding it, because she needed to do something with her hands. Noah watched her carefully. She wasn't the same girl he'd known, and yet she was. There was a story hiding behind her eyes, something deeper than the silence between them. "You look different," he finally said, carefully choosing his words. She let out a soft laugh, the kind of laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I feel different," he nodded. "It's good to see you, Maya." She looked down at her hands. "It's good to see you, too." The waitress came over and took their order, 2 coffees, just like old times. Maya wrapped her fingers around the warm cup the second it arrived, holding it like it was the first warmth she'd felt in a long time. She didn't drink it right away. She just held it close like she needed it to steady herself. "I didn't think you'd come," Noah admitted quietly. She lifted her eyes to his. "I almost didn't." That answer stayed in the air for a moment, filling the space between them. She looked around the cafe, the people laughing at other tables, the soft music playing in the background, the way everything felt normal. She didn't feel normal. She felt like a piece of a puzzle that didn't quite fit anymore. "I wasn't sure if I should," she added. "It's been a long time." Noah leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Yeah, it has." The world outside the window moved slowly. People walked by with their hands in their pockets. Cars passed with their headlights glowing against the gray sky. Inside, time felt different, slower, heavier, more fragile. Maya took a deep breath and met his gaze again. For the first time since she walked in, Noah saw something flicker in her eyes. Not the old fire, not yet. But something real. Something she was trying hard to hold together. "Where were you, Maya?" he finally asked. "All this time?" Her fingers tightened around the cup. She didn't answer right away. She looked out the window instead, watching the world go by like she wasn't really part of it. "That's complicated," she said softly. "I can handle complicated." She almost smiled at that. Noah had always been patient with her. That was one of the things she used to love about him. He never rushed her. He never pushed too hard. He just waited until she was ready, and maybe that was why she had come back. Maybe a part of her knew that if there was one person who would still see her, really see her, it was Noah. "I went through some things," she said slowly. "Things I didn't want anyone to see. I thought it was better to disappear than to explain." He listened carefully. She wasn't giving details yet, but he could hear the weight in her voice. Life had changed her. It wasn't a story of someone who simply walked away. It was a story of someone who had been through storms. "You could have told me," he said softly. There was no anger in his voice, just quiet sadness. She shook her head. "No, I couldn't. I wasn't the person you remembered anymore. And I didn't want you to see me like that." Noah didn't say anything right away. He just looked at her. Even after all this time, she could still make him feel things he couldn't put into words. And now, sitting here across from her, he felt something else too. An ache for everything she must have gone through alone. She finally took a sip of her coffee, letting the warmth spread through her. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make her feel like she wasn't running anymore. She was here. She was being seen. Noah smiled gently. "You're here now. That's what matters." Her eyes softened at his words. She had spent so long believing that she didn't belong anywhere anymore. But his voice carried no judgment. No harsh questions. Just quiet acceptance. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a small spark of safety. They began to talk slowly at first. About little things. About the city. About how much had changed and how much hadn't. He told her about his new job at the design studio, about how he still walked by the lake where they used to sit together on warm evenings. She laughed when he told her he still hated the taste of green tea, just like before, and for a brief moment the years between them disappeared. But as the light outside dimmed and the cafe grew quieter, The air between them changed again. She grew quieter, her smile fading a little. Noah noticed it right away. "Hey," he said softly. "You don't have to tell me everything. But you can if you want to." Maya bit her lip, looking down at the cup again. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark surface of the coffee. "Noah," she whispered, "there's something I need to tell you. But it's not easy." His voice stayed calm. "It's okay. You can take your time." She exhaled slowly, as if releasing years of hidden weight. "I didn't just leave because I wanted to," she said. "I left because I felt like I didn't have a choice. I was trying to survive." Noah's fingers tightened around his cup, not in anger but in quiet ache for her. She had always been strong. To hear that she had been struggling, that she had felt cornered, made something deep inside him tighten. Maya continued, her voice trembling just a little. "For a long time I didn't have a place to stay. I didn't have anyone I could talk to. I became invisible, and after a while, I started to believe that maybe I was meant to stay that way." Her honesty filled the quiet room like a soft storm. She wasn't looking for pity. She wasn't trying to make him feel sorry for her. She was simply speaking the truth. The truth she had carried alone for far too long. Noah leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You were never invisible to me." Those words made her blink fast, as if holding back tears. She hadn't expected that. She hadn't expected kindness after so much distance. She looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time that day, she saw the same person she had once loved. Not changed by years, but steadied by them. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Outside, the sky turned darker, and the first few drops of rain began to fall on the windows. Inside, everything slowed down. It felt like the world had narrowed to just the two of them. Maya smiled weakly. "I didn't think you'd still care." Noah's voice was steady. "Some things don't fade that easily." She lowered her eyes, feeling something warm inside her chest. It wasn't the heat of the coffee anymore. It was something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. They stayed there for a long while. No rush, no pressure. Just quiet conversation, soft laughter, and the unspoken understanding that the story between them wasn't finished. Maybe it had only paused. Maybe it had been waiting for this moment. For the first time in years, Maya didn't feel like a shadow. She felt seen. And Noah, sitting across from her, didn't see the missing years first. He saw her. The same girl who once filled his world with light, and the woman who had survived enough to find her way back, and that was only the beginning.